Oh, hey, it's Derrick here in the closet chat. I thought I'd do a little introduction, introducing you to the conversation because I kind of just launched straight in and you don't get as much of the context. This conversation was so amazing. Like Lucinda says at the very end, it's like a conversation amongst friends. It's so thoughtful and considered and patient. And Lucinda Chua is an incredible artist that you must check out and you must listen to. But as well as that, we have this overarching topic to explore, which is music, film soundtracks. But then we kind of almost cracked the nut and understood how that influenced both of us in terms of our careers or music making in her case and identity. She also talks about working with FKA Twigs and her classical background and how she builds these worlds. And oh, there's a great part about cello, which I'm going to definitely be thinking about a lot. So I hope you like it. It's a good one. My favorite conversation. Let's go.
Hello, everyone. It's Derrick Gee speaks volumes, but in this case, it's Lucinda Chua speaks volumes. We have a special guest, a very special guest in the house today. I would like to. I can do all the formal introductions, but we'll start with hello. Hello, Lucinda.
Hi, Derrick.
Welcome to the podcast. We are doing this at the time of recording in your morning and my evening. And it's nice to chat because I feel like we're going to get in it and amongst it. I think I should share my kind of like connection with your music first, which is I still am a SoundCloud supporter and fan of yours. And I don't know how many years ago I found your work. Maybe it was the mixtapes, maybe it was a mix, but maybe this is like a bit of a tease to what's to come, but the whole world that you built already, like the sound, the visuals, and everything in between had me very intrigued, and I've been a fan ever since. And so it was really nice that your label had reached out in the inbox, not long ago to say, would I be up for chatting? And I was like, of course. So it's great. I'm a big fan of your work. And I don't know, should I introduce what you do? Should you introduce who you are for those who don't know who you are?
I think you should do it because it's the one thing that I find like really painful is being like, hi, my name's Lucinda Chua and I do. So I hand that over to you.
Okay, let's go. Let's do my best to represent. Lucinda Chua is a brilliant London, UK, British, half Chinese, right?
Yes.
Multi-instrumentalist, producer, produces and mixes her music. She creates what I could describe as very evocative, I'm terrible with genres, as my audience knows. There's an ambient element to what you do. There's a ballad element to what you do. There's a pop element to what you do. It's very evocative of, worlds that, early Massive Attack and I Feel, and Air and artists like that. But she is an artist that exists in a very particular space. She's a cellist as well. That kind of is quite a rare space of someone that is making, art with a capital A, but is like so beautiful that it's very hard to dislike, and is something that you could sit and listen to with your eyes closed in an auditorium or in a gallery and feel right at home. And that is Lucinda, everyone. How'd I do?
That was so nice. Thank you.
Not bad.
Honestly, yeah, thank you.
Oh, I'm glad. I'm glad. As I speak to more and more people, I won't be able to do this forever, but I like that I'm a fan of your work because it makes things a lot easier because I'm just genuine, right? And we are here to talk about your music. You released an album not that long ago. called Yan. How long ago now? A couple months?
Yeah. You know what? I can't really remember it. It's been such a blur, but I think it came out either March or April.
Okay. And I've listened to a bunch of your interviews that you've done, and you did one with Resident Advisor. And as the listener of this podcast knows, I like to somewhat have a thesis or a way to approach the discussion. And I don't have the concrete thesis of like, this is the this of that, but we're talking about soundtracks and the importance, significance, and how that relates to you and your story. I think that's the main goal here. But I think that the way that you approach things,
we can author our own thesis.
Exactly, and maybe we'll figure it out by the end. So I need to stop talking now because this is you, not me. And let's discuss. I'll start with this, and then you can talk for an hour straight. Your music is very visual. It's very cinematic. It's very, it evokes landscapes, soundscapes, space. It's very visual in not only what you do with your artwork, but what you do with your music videos, but what you do, what one does when one listens to it. You can kind of feel these spaces, and it's discussing with you and also kind of thinking about it more, it does make sense that soundtracks informed a large part of perhaps your persona and your inspiration. And let's talk about the music first. Like, how do you write music? Do you imagine worlds when you're making it? How do you feel like it becomes so visual?
Ooh. I think when I write music, I start off by thinking about like the skeleton of it. So maybe I don't really go into like the textures and the colors and the space of it. I'm kind of more like focusing on what's the kernel inside the song or inside the composition, and like, what do I want that to communicate? And I feel like once I have a clear idea of what that means for me, and I have a bit of a kind of like skeleton of a song, that's when I start thinking about space and journey and light and shade and what I want it to feel like, and how can I use production to kind of like evoke those feelings. But I think at the crux of it, I kind of need to know for myself, like, what is it that I'm trying to say and what's the intention behind this song? Otherwise, I can just get so lost in the production. But deep down, I try and think like, if I was playing this just on the piano and singing without a microphone, or if a busker was like covering this with an acoustic guitar on the street, like, what is the message underneath the production?
That's beautiful. I feel like a lot of artists, like the artists either like hear a sound that like inspires their work, or you need to have the kind of like the idea to inspire the creation of it. And does it, there's a lot of personal stories, a lot of thoughts of identity and obviously life experience. And once you have that kernel down, as we said, you play a variety of different instruments and you produce and you engineer. Like, where do you go? Like, do you pick up something? Do you experiment? How does it work for you?
I guess playing with instruments, like piano and cello are the instruments that I guess I studied from quite a young age. So they're like my primary tools. But then I'm really excited at the intersection between taking these like classical instruments, but then working in Ableton or using effects pedals to kind of like manipulate and alter the sound. So it almost becomes something new. It's like authoring a new voice of an instrument. I think I'm really interested in that like crossover. Yeah.
And, you know, to lead into the kind of like cinematic elements of it, I think there's like, I think you've spoken about like different songs having different almost rooms or spaces. Like, did you study production and kind of this design of sound?
Not really. I mean, like, I guess it was just through experimentation and through trial and error. Like when I was at university, so I didn't actually study music at university. I studied photography. 'Cause I kind of wanted to be a visual artist when I was younger, but I guess my family were worried that if I became like a fine artist, I would struggle to like find work. And so with photography, it felt like a slightly more vocational career option.
Yeah.
But it still was expressive and conceptual. And I think photography, I really enjoyed the social side of it, as in I took a lot of portraits and photographed a lot of people, and photography almost like became a way to like build relationships and connect with people, having that time, like making that image together. But I did an elective in sound production at university because I had to kind of get extra credits in order to pass the year. And it was like lo-fi, I guess lo-fi production with a lot of analog techniques. So like tape splicing and making field recordings on mini disc and then working with that in the computer. I think we used Cubase. But I can't remember what your question was.
No, this is really great because I feel like I'm kind of piecing together parts of the story that all will fit into the greater, you know, piece, because, you know, I studied graphic design and that informs a lot of how I think, even though I don't do that anymore.
I think it's that, like, design principle or like art, like, I don't know, when I was studying photography, it was quite like a conceptual course rather than like a practical course. And the crits could go really hardcore in like you would get grilled to kind of like speak for your idea and what it meant and what you were trying to say and what your references were and like what are the semiotics of this. And,
yes.
And so I think in a way, when I graduated, I was kind of like a bit afraid to be a photographer because I'd been so schooled in like all the rules of how to read an image and what's the studium and what's the punctum. And, you know, that when it actually came to making, I didn't feel as free. But then in a way, I wonder if I applied that thinking and that schooling to music, which is something that I'd done from such a young age in a very like carefree way.
For sure. It's
those transferable skills kind of informed each other.
Yeah, like, so you got photography, you've got field recording, which I'm almost like cherry picking to like, you know, add to this world of Lucinda. And then there's obviously, for those who haven't listened to multiple interviews with Lucinda, me, you studied playing the cello right from a young age.
The cello and the piano, yeah. I started piano when I was 3, and I started the cello when I was 10.
I could discuss and ask you 1,000 questions about the Suzuki method, but I won't. But that's another facet of you as we lead up to talking more about soundtracks, but like that formed that almost core or root of you as an artist. Is like, how would you summarize your youth experience as a learning and expressing yourself through instruments?
I felt like the emphasis was on play and not on grades. And there was like reward and encouragement for showing up and trying. And you got the same applause if you played the right hand of Mary Had a Little Lamb, age 4, as you did if you were like, I don't know, playing really fancy like classical repertoire. It was just like, from my experience, it was a really encouraging environment, and learning to play by ear, developing an ear for music and for musicianship, getting to play with other people. There was a lot of emphasis on ensemble playing and performing from a very young age, but that being something that was quite low pressure. And the emphasis being like, you're sharing music with an audience. Yeah, it was
beautiful.
It was really nice.
Because I learnt piano from young until probably early teens, and didn't do the Suzuki method and hated it because it was very stressful, sight reading, doing all the exams, and it's the method of Suzuki method that sounds like a very fundamental to perhaps how you might operate, in a sense. Like there's performance, there's audience, there's expression without as many like rules, although there's an expectation, which kind of is, I wanted to make sure people knew about that side of you as well. Do you, in your core, because of the instruments that you learnt, do you absolutely love classical music? Is it just part of you?
Some of it I really love, but I definitely think there was like a switch when I was taking classes, like as a little kid, a lot of the repertoire would be very like Mozart and Beethoven and Bach. And then I think as my like playing skill got better as a teenager, I kind of discovered Ravel and Shostakovich and Debussy, and it kind of felt like, that feeling when you're a teenager and you like find a band and you feel like that band is your band.
Oh yeah.
And like your parents don't know about it, or they're not, I don't know, into it, and you're like, this is mine, and it just really like connects with you on a very deep level. I felt like, yeah, probably like as a teenager I got to that point, and a lot of that was through playing chamber music and string quartet.
Wow.
And by that point I wasn't studying Suzuki anymore, but I was part of a local music center that was very encouraging of me, despite the fact I didn't have any grades and wasn't as quick at reading sheet music. But yeah, it was when I got to play the music that I liked or that I'd chosen, it was this real like incredible like connection of the training and the practice and the discipline of music, but then the like having agency to be like, I want to play this.
Yes.
Or even like playing along at home to like the Nirvana records, where there's like cello on Unplugged in New York.
Ooh.
Like, because I had the ear, it was so easy just to like, to inhabit those parts. And I think it was like making that connection between a classical world, but then a world that I felt like I related to.
So you have those bands, right? And you have those artists that I totally relate, that it's wholly yours and your secret and becomes part of your identity. What was the first film that made you feel like that, do you think?
I think it was probably Requiem for a Dream.
Wow.
The Clint Mansell soundtrack.
Yeah.
And that was before that music like got used in like Lord of the Rings or anything. So it was like, but just the harmony and dissonance and like anguish in the arrangement of that string quartet. It was like, I don't know, like an awakening moment. Whereas where I could like connect, this is an instrument that I play, that it can be used to say something like this.
Wow. And had you heard things like that before, do you think?
I think maybe I could relate it to like some of the repertoire that I played. Like I played some of the Shostakovich 8 string quartet, which is really dark and it's really sad. And it's basically like, I don't know, Shostakovich waking up after the war and like all of his family are dead and his neighborhood's been bombed. And he's kind of like, the melody, the motif is written around the letters of his name. And it's like really haunting. But I guess with the Requiem for a Dream soundtrack, it's because it was connected to the story of these people that it was kind of like the music and the film coming together to like convey a really intense emotion.
I think the Tarantino talks about it because obviously Tarantino has really great soundtracks of pop music, and he talks about how film is one of those very rare and unique mediums where you can take a visual and take a song and create a whole new piece of expression, which is really exciting, and it's like almost like alchemy in a sense, which I'm sure you've seen in films that you love. Like what's a good film? What's a good film soundtrack? What does it mean to be a good film soundtrack? Like what does it? How does it affect you? Like we talk about you being obsessed over a film or TV soundtrack. Like what moves you?
I think it's less like what moves you, and I think it's more for me about like the intention of how those two elements work together. Because I guess otherwise it just comes down to like what's your musical taste in terms of like what moves you, and that could be applied to any kind of taste in life. You know,
yes,
you prefer one flavor to another.
Yeah,
but I think it's really understanding what the intention is of a scene or of a moment, and then I guess the music almost becomes like an actor in itself, that it's there to add an extra layer of dialogue that's non-verbal. And it can be super subtle or it can be like super extrovert.
Yes.
But it's like contributing something that, I don't know, for me, it's the music that really drives the emotions.
I love the films that have scores and themes that keep coming back throughout the film that you like in you know, in really like horrifying ways and really beautiful ways as well. I think that's so clever.
Do you watch Succession?
I'm about to watch episode 9. You've woken up to it. Come on after this.
I'm not going to say any spoilers, but I think that soundtrack is like, Nicholas Britell is crazy, right? Crazy.
Well, tell me about it. Let's talk about like, you know, where a lot of us are Succession fans. I'm a huge Succession fan. I'm probably an episode behind you at this point, but episode 8 was so stressful, and I forgot how stressed it can make me. And talk about like what do you feel? What do you see, both as a fan, as an artist? What does it do to you? What do you love about it?
Just the intensity and the intensity on a macro and a micro level, right? Because it's kind of like you have these big like twists and turns, but then also deep down you have this like simmering, intense family dynamic, which is something that everyone can relate to, you know, in terms of like personal relationships. And I don't know, I always think of like Succession and The Crown as being kind of the same, same thing, but just in different world, right? But yeah, I love the the sibling dynamics underneath everything. But I love that because what you were saying before about like the motif that comes back. I love that. Yeah. Stomping motif with the piano that's like slightly like twisted and haunted and a bit like off.
Yeah.
And how he brings that motif back, and it can become like a lament in a really sad moment, and they'll be like, it will be played by the orchestra by strings, or it can be like a solo piano moment, or with that like really like crunchy bass underneath. It can be like an anthem.
Yes.
But yeah.
Do you see yourself, do you kind of, I was going to ask if you see yourself doing soundtracks one day, but it's almost like you already are in a sense, because like I'm
doing the soundtracks to the films that are playing inside my head.
Exactly. And that's true. When you look at your music videos, you look at your live performances, not that I've seen it in real life, but you know, there's a very cinematic element to it. There's a dance element to it. There's like lots of lighting and very considered. You creative direct, I assume, these worlds. Like what sort of worlds are you trying to build? Like there's a lot of like, if anyone looks up the visuals after this of the latest release, they're stunning and they're, you know, quite opulent but also quite fragile in a way. Like what are you building, Lucinda?
It's interesting because I think as I'm making it, I'm never like, let's build this. It's almost like it's just easy to make the decision. No, it should be this way. But I guess that's why it's lucky that I'm the artist, because if I was making it for a client, I would have no like language to justify why. But I think intuitively a lot of it, again, is the form is led by the feeling. And especially with the creative for this record, like so much of it is about like creating a feeling of intimacy or creating a feeling of like otherness or creating like a non-space that anyone could imagine themselves belonging inside, or creating a space that references the past but equally could belong to the future. And then like paying homage or reference to like Chinese culture, like using like motifs that belong to history but equally to my memory. And I guess it all just kind of gets mixed up in a pot and becomes this thing that I get to exist inside. And in my mind, I'm making a world that just makes sense, when sometimes this world to me doesn't make sense. And so maybe that's, and I think often the same with the writing the music. It's like, it's a world that I enjoy belonging in, you know, like making the album. I really enjoyed spending time crafting it. Like working in the session became like a space for me to explore and to like inhabit and to be the main character of.
Totally. Were you alone? Were you on your own when you were doing a lot of it?
For a lot of it, yeah. But I guess not just the main character, but also kind of like the architect of.
Yes.
I guess that's...
Ooh.
It's probably more being the architect of it than the main character. It was like being able to design a world that made sense and felt intuitive to me.
Mm-hmm. It did. I asked that question because perhaps I've read enough about the process, or perhaps but it did feel like that in a cool way, that it was like, it felt like you were alone in the making process of it. There's a kind of, solitary, you know, reflection, I guess, within it, which is really cool. I gratefully interrupt this beautiful conversation to shout out and tell you about the podcast sponsor, Turntable Lab, who are the trusted source for turntables, records, and audio gear for the last 20 years. And have been a big supporter of the podcast. So shout out to Turntable Lab. So what do you need to know? Well, you know, I know a lot of you are looking for stuff to upgrade your setup. And if you want to know where the good stuff is, the trusted resources, the trusted elements that you could add, whether it's a needle or a stylus, as they say, or a turntable, a record player, some would say. Or you could also dip into the lab, which is a part of the store that has over 100,000 records as well. So you can buy it all in one stop shop. So they've got this deal going, right? It's called 4 or More, where if you buy 4 or more records, you can get 10% off, which is very lovely. Turntablelab.com. Or you can also check out my page, turntablelab.com/Derrick. And you can see the things that I own. You can see the things that I want to buy. You can see the things that I recommend for beginners. Ultimately, a little place to get familiar once you want to upgrade your system. And I'll be adding more and more things to it as I acquire and test out more things as well. But Turntable Lab, it's the place to go if you want that trusted, you know, there's lots of those weird sites out there that kind of like sell all these random things, and I don't trust them personally. So that's where I'll go, Turntable Lab. Check it out, please. Support the pod, support the sponsor. Back to the episode. Do you feel like the music, can you as an artist separate the visual from the music from the live performance, or are they all kind of as like with these sounds and soundtracks and, you know, worlds that you've experienced throughout your life, are those all the set piece of what this is, do you think?
I think they're all coming from the same intention or the same place. Maybe it's like that little kernel that I spoke about earlier. I think it's that's driving the making process. But I think the like philosophy and approach is consistent maybe throughout. Yeah. The same way that I would think about editing something out of a song is the same way I would think about, I don't know, set design. You know, in the song I'm like painting in the trees or the stream or the rocks.
Yeah.
Or like, is it cold and rainy or is it like sunny? Mm-hmm. Like, are you in a really comforted cocoon-like space, or is it a really expansive, like, view of the horizon? Mm-hmm. It's kind of the same, I think, when it comes to making images.
Yes. I like this. It's because I was kind of eventually getting there, but I guess we'll go there now. But it's like, you know, thinking and talking about, like, soundscapes and landscapes and like the visual things, like you said, and the rocks and the wind and things like that. And there is, I assume there's certain instruments and ways, the things that you'd reach for, whether it's like colder and metal or, you know, warmer and more organic. Do you have all those tools in your arsenal, I assume. Like, what do you reach for? Like, maybe more pointed. Like, what is the cello to you in terms of like, almost like a feeling or a visual?
The cello is the treat that I often say for the end.
Ooh.
So I would say I use the keyboard or the piano to do my like heavy lifting. So that's like the bones. Maybe part of that is because I can see all of the keys mapped out in front of me. And so it's I do a lot of my like structural writing or composing on the piano. And then I come to the cello and I use it more as a texture or as a voice. Yeah, but I probably use them in quite different ways.
What kind of texture does it?
Anything. Because also it's like when I'm using pedals or I'm like processing or manipulating, it's not like the cello has to represent wood. It's like it can be anything. I can get some really nasty sounds out of the cello, and that's really fun.
Cello is, I've always said this to myself, that when I retire, when I'm old, I'd love to learn the cello. I think it's a very, very incredible instrument. Do you feel that as someone that's played it their whole life?
Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure.
What is it? Like what, because it's used in so much, like it's more than, like I feel like it's used in horror films, you know, a whole lot. It's used in romantic, bonnet dramas or whatever, you know. What is it, do you think, about the cello?
I guess it's in a similar register to the human voice.
I didn't know that.
Its form is kind of a bit like a human. You hold it close to your body, so it's automatically an intimate instrument compared to like a drum which you hit. So maybe there's some kind of like, I don't know, anthropomorphized projection on there. I don't know. I'm literally spitballing right now.
It's blowing my mind. I agree.
And maybe the way that with the vibrato you can control the tone of the voice. Like when I play the cello, I can make it sound confident or happy, or I can make it sound like it has a lump in its throat and it's going to cry, you know? Or I can make it sound like nails on a chalkboard. I guess there's so much range in how you can express. And because it's fretless, it's like, yeah, it's fretless and keyless.
Yes.
So the kind of like boundaries and the edges are totally blurred. You know, like if you play the piano, you're on the grid. The pitch is decided for you. You can't really alter it. Whereas the cello, there are so many different like you can purposefully play it out of tune, and that can sound really cool.
Yeah. There's a
lot of freedom.
Yeah, there's that like dissonance that you can access at any point. I'm going to remember that forever. I love that description that you said of it, because it's there is something about it that just like I feel like gets in people's blood and bones about it.
And it literally vibrates when you play it, so you really feel that resonance or all the frequencies, you know?
Yeah. It's
like, I remember I was playing on tour with FKA Twigs, and we did a show at Brixton Academy. It was like the big London home show for the Magdalene tour. And the band, we were up on like there were like, I don't know, three stories of scaffolding, and we were like up on the first layer above the ground. And I was like in the middle, but the subwoofer was underneath me. And so the whole like platform was kind of like vibrating because of the sub bass. And so I had my in-ear monitors in, and I'd be like, oh, I can't hear the cello. Can you turn it up? Can you turn it up? Can you turn it up? And it got to the point where I realized that the reason I couldn't hear it is because partly I use the vibrations of the cello to pitch, but I'm not necessarily listening with my ears. I'm listening with my body.
Oh, wow.
And because the whole cello and platform was vibrating on this scaffolding because of the subwoofer.
Yes.
I couldn't hear myself, and it didn't matter how loud it was in my ears. I couldn't feel it.
Wow. That's its own thing about music that kind of trips me out, that it's like, you know, if you have headphones on, it's an experience for the ears, but when you go to a concert, it's a full body experience, which is like, you know, whole long discussion about sound bars and stuff like that. But that's
Totally.
what a crazy experience.
Totally.
Tell me more about who are your in the soundtrack world. Like, are there any that stand out to you that you know, favorite films, favorite soundtracks that have stayed with you and influenced you?
You know, a film that I watched again recently that I really love is Orlando. You know, the adaptation of the Virginia Woolf book with Tilda Swinton in it. The soundtrack for that is like totally mind-blowing for me.
Tell me why.
I think it's just so like physical, and so it's by David Motion and Sally Potter, and Sally Potter
really?
actually directed the film. I need to research more into it, but I guess she like co-wrote or is performing on the soundtrack too. But I guess because it's a film that spans like such a broad period of time, because Orlando lives forever, I love the mix of like the very classical kind of like chamber music moments, but then also these really tender like voice and guitar with lots of tremolo moments, and then the kind of like big pop song at the end. But I guess it's that music transporting you to different places and different worlds.
I love how you said physical, because I feel like there's an element, there's like this constant element with how you describe music in a very visual or bodily way, which I don't know if I've ever described music as physical before.
I guess it's like the sensuality of music in the sense that it appeals to your senses, right? There are certain sounds I hear and they have like a taste almost, you know, like a metallic taste, because they're bright and twangy, or I don't know. Do you ever get that when you're listening to music?
Not in a way that I could articulate. I feel like perhaps you have, like, it's not quite synesthesia, but I feel like you have the, you know, how you associate sounds to like a visual or physical form is quite cool, and perhaps obviously informs what you do, which is I would say that I definitely get it more when I play music loud, and I'm a big proponent for that, because I think that we all are in our heads so much that I feel like I feel and think the most when there's just music kind of like coming at me type thing. And tell me more. I want to hear all of the films that you like, especially like, I feel like it's a bit of a text for us to all enjoy and look up, and, you know, are there others in your arsenal that are particularly...
Did you ever see that film? I think it was in the like early 2000s. It's a Japanese film called All About Lily Chou-Chou.
No.
I remember watching that as a teenager. It's like, it's really intense and quite dark. It's about like these high school children who are all just, I guess, struggling to connect. And it's in the age of like the early internet. So there are a lot of like forums, and the film is kind of based around the fandom for this artist, Lily Chou-Chou, who's, I guess, I don't know if this is super reductive to say, but like kind of like a Japanese Bjork, in the sense that she's a very visionary artist. She's carving out her own sound. She's building a very visual world. And for the soundtrack of that film, they actually created an album as this artist. And a lot of the soundtrack also leans on piano music by Debussy, because one of the characters plays the piano.
Yeah.
And again, it's just this really beautiful intersection between classical music and pop music, but then also you just get to feel all of the emotions that these teenagers are feeling that they can't express for themselves about their own lives, but they're able to articulate them so clearly when it comes to analyzing or dissecting her music or what it means to them, or this whole culture that surrounds the record.
Yes.
And I just really loved that. And I go back to that soundtrack and listen to it regularly. I'd say it's probably my most listened to soundtrack because it's just a great album.
So it's a fictional artist
album made by Lily Chou-Chou, yeah, which would have been the dream project to make, right?
Yeah, I do love that. I feel like it's pretty rare in film that there's a fictional artist that makes real music that exists out in the world. I'm sure that there's more highbrow examples, but Almost Famous has a band that's like has music out that you can stream that is not a real band.
Wow.
That's part of that whole narrative, and kind of I listen to it as you probably would with this film and like imagine this world that never existed, like in the 60s type thing, early 70s.
That's cool.
Yeah, I feel like my taste is probably a lot more basic than yours in film, and the soundtracks that I like are either like ones that use pop music really cleverly, whether that's like, like I said, Tarantino films or Wong Kar-wai films and things like that.
The Wong Kar-wai film soundtracks are incredible.
It's turned me on to a lot of different things. But
which is your favorite Wong Kar-wai film?
It's actually Happy Together.
Me too.
Which is because
it's so good.
It's so I'll never forget that film.
I know.
Whereas I can rewatch In the Mood for Love and be like, oh, I don't remember this scene. It's beautiful, it's stunning, it's a great film, but I'll be like, I don't remember. I'm like, I've seen Happy Together once and I still remember it all, and I still remember how it made me feel.
The emotions are so potent and so central in that film, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I love In the Mood for Love, but it's kind of like a mood, right?
Yeah, a mood board, a feeling of
Totally.
capturing a feeling of those two.
Whereas Happy Together, it's like Tony Leung and Leslie Chung are like so brutal to each other, and you kind of like love them both and hate them both, and see them do all these horrible things to each other, but also know that they care about each other, and it's just this really like toxic codependent relationship.
Completely. The toxicity is what stayed with me. It's one of those films. Some of my favorite films I've only seen once.
I watched it as a teenager, and I actually watched it with my family.
Oh, Jesus.
For the first time, yeah. And it was interesting because I watched it again. They did like a big rerun of Wong Kar-wai's film in the UK, so you could go and see them in the cinema. And so I went back and rewatched it. And I remember the first time when I watched it as a teenager, I really empathized with Tony Leung's character. And watching it back, I was like, oh, wow, he was actually pretty mean. Like, he stole Leslie Chung's passport, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So it's kind of like, it was interesting how like younger me had a different read on it as older me, I guess. I just love the use of tango in it.
Right.
And tango being like the most sorrowful dance of heartbreak.
Well put. Like, I think, there's so much romanticism to Wong Kar-wai's work and soundtracking, which is completely different. It's largely popular music. It's rarely like actually designed, but can make a pretty cheesy Nat King Cole record singing in Spanish be the most stunning record out, which I now own like the record of, and you listen to it and his pronunciation in Spanish is horrible, but so evocative.
Also, it was really interesting because it made me think of a lot of that music as Asian.
Yes.
Because it was like hearing that music in that world kind of gave me a different entry point to it.
Yeah. That's really interesting. Can we like dig in a little bit on that a bit? Because I know that you've discussed and talked about, you know, identity and being, you know, half Chinese and the, you know, say Asian and Southeast Asian experience. Like, do these? I want to hear. I'd love to hear a little bit about it, especially like, you know, speaking about Wong Kar-wai and like, you know, the songs that kind of feel more Asian in a sense. And do you feel like, I know that you've talked about those role models that were or were not around. Did film act as that in some ways?
You know, as you're talking now, it's like the penny is like dropping. And it's something that I'd never actually thought of until this moment now. But yeah, of course, watching film and having access to Asian culture through film probably played a really large part in me trying to figure out what my Asian identity was in the absence of having like a large Asian family or Asian kids in my school around. So probably in watching those films, I was really like searching for who I should be, or I don't know where I came from.
How did they make you? Did they make you feel proud? Did they make you feel intrigued? Did they make you feel passionate, do you think?
I don't even think I got to that point, you know. I think I was just hungry.
Yes.
And I probably didn't even know why. You know, I think it's not until like as an adult I'm able to almost like reflect back on that and be like, maybe I liked that because of that. But I guess like when you're a kid, you're just like, I like this. But I guess like watching All About Lily Chou-Chou and watching teenagers in Japan play Debussy,
right.
It was an easier access point to Debussy than, I don't know, going to a concert where it would be like classical concert with majority white people. And I don't know, it, very different world.
This conversation is almost always already my favorite conversation. I smiled because like
of your life,
of my life, in this setting, but also of my life. I smile because I've been thinking a lot about, you know, it's nice that we're both Asian and it's this discussion, not that it was by design, but I've been thinking a lot about the people that were the people that I looked up to. And there are many, whether they're like, you know, DJs or rock stars. And I think a lot of that for me was around like, I didn't know people like me were allowed in those spaces. And I think, as I've spoken about a lot on my podcast and on my videos, Ryuichi Sakamoto at a certain point in my early 20s was like, I was at that point learning about music, a big music nerd, but one only knew about Brian Eno and Kraftwerk, and to see someone so advanced in their discography that no one was introducing to me, and I had to discover, just split my brain in two. And I was like, wait, hold on a second. There's a lot of reasons why I think a lot about music, and it's like these experiences, you know, where you're like, I didn't know that was a thing. I didn't know those people were doing that over there. I just thought it was like foreign and different and weird. And there's this person doing beautiful things that kind of looks like me, you know? Do you feel like you had little markers in your life that, you know, there's film, as we've discussed, in a sense. Do you think that there were some in your life that showed you that you could? Do you think?
With music?
Yeah.
Probably Twigs. Yeah. I mean, it was the first time I'd ever had like a woman of color as a boss, you know? All the jobs I'd worked previously, I'd been in a company and I'd been employed by like white men. And seeing her as the boss of her own company as well as the artist, and how she had agency over who she chose to collaborate with and what kind of environment she chose to surround herself in. I was kind of like, oh, are we allowed to do that? You know, do you know what I mean? I guess it's this like asking for permission. I always felt like a lot of my life I was like asking permission to be myself. And it felt really radical working with her. And yeah, not just working with her as an artist, but working with her as a business was really radical.
Did you see a lot of that side? Could you, like, for the audience, share a bit more what you did with her?
So I played in her live band. I did my first concert with her, I think, in maybe it was like 2015 or 2016. But then I went on tour in her live band with her for her Magdalene album. So we went on a world tour together.
Wow.
And so I was very much like in that world almost full time. But it was just so inspiring to get to play Afropunk, you know? And to see the joy of everyone wanting it to be a really great moment, you know, right down to like the security guards. Like everyone was just like wishing it to be this exceptional moment, and it became an exceptional moment because of that. And it made me think, I wish we had an Asian festival, you know, so that we could feel that joy. Or yeah,
wow. It's funny because you make me think that sometimes when I see artists with like classically trained accompaniment, I always wonder what they think, like those players, because I always just imagine that they're like very classically trained and they just think all of this is rubbish. But it's kind of cool that you existed in that and you took away, like, obviously I'm generalizing, but it's like one assumes, oh, they just hired some person to play these instruments that isn't part of this world, but it really like helped to show you that you could.
Oh, but also I'm sure that's why she chose me. You know, because there are so many incredible classical cellists that are way better at playing the cello than me. And yeah, but I'm sure there was something in my story or in my identity that resonated with her. And that's partly the reason why we ended up working together.
How did she hear of you?
It was through her A&R Tick, who also used to be in her band. But I remember he sent me a text message being like, oh, Twigs is looking for a cellist. Do you mind if I put you forwards? And I was working in like an office job at the time. I was working as like a creative consultant, consulting with brands. And so we'd do research and put like decks together being like, here are cool people doing cool things. Be more like them. And I remember like she was in the case studies, you know? So we were doing like presentations to big global brands being like, look at this campaign she's directed with Nike. You should partner with like strong female artists who have a strong sense of, you know, and then he was texting me being like, want to come along and have this like tryout session. And I had such little confidence as a cellist that I remember like thinking about it for hours, being like, I can't do this, but I could suggest someone else who's a real cellist who should do this, you know?
Yeah.
And then a friend of mine, Latir, who's also an amazing artist, he was the receptionist at the company. We kind of like had this allyship because we both worked in this office job, but we both love music as well.
Yeah.
He was like, look, they wouldn't ask you if you weren't ready. He was like, just go and do it. And so I was like, okay. So I went and did it. And I don't know. I thought she wanted something different. I thought she wanted me to come in and be like a great classical cellist. And so I kind of went into the audition trying to emulate that.
Yeah.
But then in the end ended up playing cello in the weird way that I play. And that's what she was looking for, you know?
What did you play? Like, did you try to do some impressive classical thing, or were you doing your own version of that? Or?
So I had to prepare something. They were like, oh, come along and play like Good to Love, which I think at her time was a single that had come out most recently. And so I'd kind of like taken the day of annual leave to like prepare for this audition and then like go. And I just told them like, can I take this day off as holiday? And they were like, okay, I'll work. But yeah, so I'd like written a part that I felt like was the best part. And of course, when I got there, they were like, oh yeah, so, you know, we're doing it in a different key and we've kind of changed the tempo and the structure's a bit different, but let's just like vibe it out. And I was like, okay. And there were like, I don't know, 10 people in the room, and they'd set me up on the middle of the stage, like a seat. And yeah, kind of like scrambled my way through it. And then she was like, okay, let's try pendulum. And then I was just like straight in on the fly, figuring out something.
Wow.
But I think because of my training, I could play by ear. Yeah. You know, some cellists can't play unless you give them the sheet music. But I think because I play so intuitively and I really like listen, and that's what my skill is, I think.
Yes.
It actually felt way more natural to just do that rather than to have prepared something that I needed to replicate.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember then there was like a little break, and then one of the managers came over to me and was like, can I get your passport details? Because we're going to be going to Germany in like a week. And I was like, oh, okay.
Wow.
I think they'd seen, I don't know, like 6 or 7 cellists or something.
Wow.
Crazy.
What a story. I was just like...
But I nearly texted back being like, no, I can't do that because I'm not very good at reading sheet music and I didn't actually go to music school.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, so I could have very easily passed on that.
Wow. And arguably
imposter syndrome, huh?
Yeah, I've you know, it's funny you say that because I've been thinking about that personally for a little bit now, about like, does it exist or is there something else, you know? Like, because I think a lot of people don't have imposter syndrome. They have like they just feel like they can inhabit every space. And I actually think that syndrome, the more I'm thinking about it, is actually a really positive trait to have, because you really think quite deeply about the rooms that you feel like you deserve to be in. And once you get there, it's not because you forced your way in, it's because you really have earned it in a way.
And it's a commitment to aspiring to achieve something beyond your immediate reach, right?
Yeah.
It's like imposter syndrome is a symptom of like wanting to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And being...
Because the opposite is like entitlement, right?
Exactly. I just like, perhaps it should just be that term, imposter syndrome, but I think it's such a plus because if you're thinking a lot about if you're right and if you're ready and still doing it, even though you might think you're not, there's something comes out of that that's more true than a lot more true than entitlement. So it's like, it's a really weird thing to have, because I know that you listen to my podcast about passion projects.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up because you are so like entrepreneurial and courageous, you know, like in taking these steps.
Yeah.
You know, like when you said about like leaving, like coming to London because you liked NTS, you know, I was like, that is such a power move. Like, that's so bold. Like, what did that feel like?
Thank
was
you.
It scary?
Yeah.
Or did you just have this feeling in your gut that you were like, it's going to be okay?
Both. I think it was scary, but it was also like, I think I might have said this, but I think a lot about life and my experience of life and how I've got one shot. And I'd had enough of the corporate experience to know that if I kept going, this was it. So it was more scary to accept that that could have been my life than it was to go like, I'm educated, I know I'm a nice person. If it doesn't work out, I'll be fine still. But I'd rather do this than just sit back and wait. And I appreciate what you say, because yeah, it's just like you not thinking that you deserve to be in these places. I don't think, you know, the following, whatever you want to call it, I have, and the people that come up to me in the streets and stuff, it's like, I've always been this guy that just thinks about music and talks about and listens to music. I haven't done anything different. I just happen to have a camera turned on, you know? So I think that the world is kind of weird and crazy like that, and presents it. That's why I say, like, why I'm thinking a lot about imposter syndrome. I still don't. I think something that you said on another podcast that really resonated with me was about like, stop trying. You stopped trying to be cool. Like, I think it was, yeah. I don't know if it was in recording something or playing something, but what was that about again?
I can't remember, but yeah, I definitely feel like a lot of my life I tried to be cool, and then I just accepted that I'm not. And then that is probably the thing that makes me cool.
Precisely.
But I think it's, I don't know, I wonder how much of it comes back to assimilation, you know? And for me, I think I've always felt like an outsider. I've always felt like on the fringe, or like on the edge, or the anomaly. Like even down to like within my own family, you know, like my parents are the first interracial marriage of their respective families.
Wow.
And so it's like, I've always been different. But I think it's interesting, you know, like when you were saying about like leaving your corporate job to do something different. I think we're both quite similar in that we've gone that way. Most people go the other way, right? Start off being artists and then are like, this is too much. And then kind of, but I feel like I got to I was in a good career. I was on a good salary, but something in my gut was like, this is not right. Because it was like, I had my values and I had my skills, but they weren't aligned.
Yes.
And I think the Twigs thing was such a wake-up call, because it was like, why are you reporting on the case study when you could be the case study?
We come from similar worlds in that regard. I've worked on those decks. It's weird, isn't it? Because it's like you're informing these big brands of culture about what is culture. And you're kind of like, all these people are in these rooms who are doing really interesting things that are that as well. But yeah, it's perhaps that's what drove us in this direction.
And have you always felt supported in going against the grain, like by family or by friends? Or... This
is the podcast about you, Lucinda. But
no, but I'm interested to see if there's crossover.
I smile a lot because my mum has always believed in me, and I think that's, you know, don't make me cry on my own podcast. But I'm one of four, and I have two older sisters, and they were very brilliant academically, and I think she felt worried that I would have to live up to that. And I've got a younger brother as well, but much younger. And I think that because of that, she let me do what I wanted to do. So like when you choose your electives for the last years of your high school, you're meant to choose maths and like an advanced level of English and history. And I chose music, design and technology. I wanted to choose visual art, but it clashed. So I chose the most basic version of maths just because I wasn't my thing, and I thought I'll just do well at that basic version of maths, and it worked out. And yeah, I kind of like, I guess to your point about entrepreneurial, I was just like, I will do what I like to do and I'll make that work for my grades. And I got into the degree I wanted despite not doing the things that you should, which is ultimately perhaps a bit of like encouragement, but also concern by my mother that I would crumble under a pressure of expectation, which is love. It's beautiful. So there you go. Now, I did tell you at the beginning of this that we'd be a tight hour, and we've gone a little bit over. But I have to say before we leave, and I hope this is the same for everyone listening, much like your music, this conversation has been very therapeutic, very restful, very calming. I think there's something about you and your music and your energy that's really lovely. And I like that I've been a fan for a while. I've gotten to meet you at least digitally to kind of hear your story, because I think that I recommend that everyone listens to the other podcasts that you've done. The Resident Advisor one. There's another one with a gentleman who was in Berlin. I forget what the podcast is called.
Lost in Sound?
Lost in Sound, yeah. Because I think that you kind of touch on different versions of yourself in each podcast.
This has just felt like a really nice chat for me.
Same. That's the ideal. That's the ideal as well, but not everyone possibly is open to that. But what's next now for you as we finish up?
Make some lunch.
I actually meant career-wise, but also food-wise. Yes. What's for lunch?
I actually just boiled some boba. So I want to make. Basically, I spend way too much money on bubble tea, but I really want to have a go at making my own.
I've never made my own. Is it hard?
We'll see.
I think that's a great way to end it, to be honest.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about career. Now, don't forget to turn your fridge back on.
Thank you for that. And no one's going to know what that means because we didn't catch that at the beginning, but I'm going to do that.
Leave it at that. But thank you so much, Lucinda Chua. Everyone listen to Yan and Antidotes and all the mixes as I have. Thank you so much for your time. It's been amazing.